Yeah, so your topic is trauma-informed intake toolkit, right? So first, tell me just kind of who you are as a clinician, about your practice. How,
Sure.
how did this topic of trauma-informed intake toolkit become a thing? Give me the
Yeah.
lowdown.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually a trauma-focused therapist. My practice is really centered on helping people address and recover from trauma and PTSD. So I've built my entire practice around helping people with trauma histories. And what
Mm,
I've noticed is that they need a different process and a protocol to get through the intake.
mm,
There's some executive functioning issues, some disorganization, some anxiety, and some nerves that impact them. And if we want to ensure client retention, we need to make that process better and easier
mm,
and smoother for them. And so I created a really smooth system for people to navigate through when they onboard with me. And then
mm,
I found when I was talking to colleagues, they were really struggling with things like, how do I get a client to do the paperwork? Our session is tomorrow and it's not all
mm,
done. Or what do I do about a credit card on file? Just like questions like that. And I just always thought, if you just had a system in place,
mm.
this would all be handled. And it's so much easier for you and for the client because when the session happens, they get to just be in the session. There's no
Yeah.
scrambling for paperwork, and you don't have to worry about, did I get everything? Is everything there? And then after the session, oh, it's so much easier because you know exactly
Mm,
what you need for medical necessity. You know exactly how to meet criteria for exposure and for trauma and for everything because it's all systematized and you have SOPs and workflows and scripts, and it makes it so much easier
mm.
to handle the labor side of an intake. And
Yeah.
therefore, you get to just be in the intake and do the clinical work. So that's
So
what it came
if
about.
I'm hearing you correctly, a well done trauma informed intake, I mean, aside from the clinical value and the humanity of it, also collects better information that makes your billing more airtight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it's kind of like a three-step process, if you will. So there's before you even meet the client. How is your advertising? How is your website? How do you explain everything to them so they know exactly
Mhm.
what to expect from the intake? And when they outreach to you and you have your initial consultation call, how do you guide them through that
Mhm.
so they don't drop off?
Yeah.
And even in that process of them doing the paperwork, you're going to have them do standardized assessment tools, fill out certain questionnaires, all things that will later help you after the intake.
Mm,
And so then after the intake is when the therapist fun stuff happens. We have to
mhm,
write our BPSS, we have to write our treatment plan, we have to do all of these things.
mm,
And so therapists often struggle with, well, is this bad enough to be called trauma? Will this
mhm,
be the level of exposure that's needed for medical necessity?
mhm,
So I go over what is the definition of trauma? How do you meet criteria for medical necessity? What are all the components that's needed?
mhm,
And I talk about the concept of the golden thread to make sure it's in
mhm.
all of your paperwork to get you to the outcome that you need, and
Yeah.
how to make systems that are much easier so that you're not constantly reinventing the wheel. You have
Mhm,
kind of more of a formulaic approach to doing this
mhm,
that helps you with getting all of your paperwork done.
mhm. Well, I love that too because I feel like I mean we're all I think wrapping our arms around trauma is this kind of core truth for a lot of people, but there's a lot of folks that treat with a trauma-informed modality, but they're not looking for the information on the front end. So in some ways, I mean, if you're an EMDR therapist and that means everybody needs EMDR, you might also have a target on your back with an insurance company if you're not looking for the right things on the front end to
Mhm.
justify the services, I
Yeah.
mean, so it really, I think, sets you up for success. It feels even more so, Cassie, with non-clinical staff in our practices. So, the amazing administrator who's 24 and not a therapist, this feels even more relevant for non-clinicians. Is that your
Right.
experience?
Well, so there's trauma-informed care and there's trauma-focused care. And so
Mm,
trauma-informed means you understand what trauma is and how it affects people. So
mhm,
yeah, admins can and should be trauma-informed. Your whole system should be trauma-informed.
mm,
Trauma-focused is the therapeutic interventions that are done for people who are struggling with the symptoms of trauma
yeah, yeah.
and PTSD. So yeah, it can help everyone in the entire system because if your admins have an SOP and a script to read from, it leaves decision-making fatigue out of the equation for them.
Mm-hmm.
So they know exactly what they're looking for. It's kind of like a checklist for them.
Mm.
It just makes everything smoother.
Do you think a lack of trauma-informed intake leads to higher no-show rates in those first
I do.
appointments, things like that?
I do because there's, first of all, the client needs to have a level of predictability as they move through the
Mm,
intake process. Starting therapy is overwhelming and
yeah.
scary for people in general, never mind someone with a trauma history. So if you have trauma supportive systems in place, it
Mm,
makes a friction-free onboarding process for them. The
mm,
more points of friction you have when onboarding a client, the more chances of them to drop out.
mm,
So when you go through a trauma-informed intake toolkit, you're reducing all of those places of friction. So
mm,
then there's less barriers to starting therapy and it reduces the chances of them dropping out. But also when they're in the session with you, because you can be more present and more empathic and more attuned, the intake
mm,
feels different for them.
mm,
I've had clients say, well, like, I knew you just weren't reading off of a checklist because the checklist
mm,
is already done.
mm,
I don't need to do it in session. And they felt like I could explore things differently and I could talk to them differently because the logistics and the paperwork that is
mm.
needed was handled in a different way.
Yeah.
And because of that, they felt more connected, more held, more contained, more understood,
Mm.
and it led to higher follow through with
Yeah,
therapy.
higher retention downstream, which also probably then also leads to higher referrals from that client going back and telling other people,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I this lady Cassie in the first session, I knew she was so
Yes.
that
Yeah.
kind of being I love that. Can you give me like one example, even a small nugget of stuff where you're like, oh my gosh, how are we not doing this with all we know with trauma in intakes? Like, what's one small tweak you would recommend?
Telling your client on that initial phone call how long they have to do the paperwork. If
Mm,
you tell clients, I need you to get it done in 24 hours, they get it done in 24 hours. But if
mm,
you don't tell them that, they don't know what's expected of them. But also, one of the core features of trauma is avoidance.
mm,
And people want to avoid triggers, avoid
mm,
cues, avoid thinking about it, avoid memories. So a person with trauma is going to avoid it and avoid it and avoid it because that's just the nature of the beast with them.
mm.
And the longer they avoid it, the higher the chance of dropout
Yeah.
because then it becomes scarier, more overwhelming. But also another point of friction. Where is that email? Where is that paperwork?
Mhm,
How do I even find it? But if I'm on the phone with you and I say, while we're on the phone, I'm going to make sure you get the email for the portal. And I'm
mm,
going to say, tell me when it comes in. And then it
mm,
pops up in there. Oh, yeah, I got it right here. Okay, great. I'm going to need that done in 24 hours. Do you have the time in the next 24 hours to get it done? If not, we can reevaluate that. 80 to 90% of the time, they say, yeah, totally. Every once in a while, they say, oh, God, no, I have my kids play tonight, or something like
mhm,
that. And they say, okay, what about 48 hours?
mm.
And then they can work in that time frame.
I would think this, it's probably even more so with people who have both trauma, but a regimented background. In other words, you come from the military, you come from a first responder environment where things very much run by protocols and
Sure.
like that kind of stuff. That
Yeah.
lack of an organization.
But to just kind of be on my my little soapbox for a minute. Yes, that is true. But 3 to 4% of men have trauma and PTSD,
Mm,
whereas 10 to 12% of women have it. So
mm,
we're going to see far more women coming into our practices needing a trauma-informed intake than we're going
mm,
to see men. And women are just more likely to seek out trauma in general. So you're not going to see the super regimented VA kind of situation. What you're going to see is are women who are perfectionistic,
mm,
who are the super moms who get everything done, and their form of avoidance, their drug of choice is perfectionism.
mm.
That's what you're going to see more likely.
Well, and that brings up the question in my mind of, or unpack this for me. The therapist who has that same manifestation, that same coping mechanism, that hasn't dealt with it themselves,
Right.
it doesn't just show up in the session as, transference, countertransference stuff. It probably shows up all throughout the process as
Oh,
well.
yeah. Do I have the right paperwork? Do I have the right intake? Do I have all the things?
Mhm.
Did I document this correctly? What if I get audited? Yeah. therapists are very anxious people.
Yeah.
They're
So
very
another way, I
anxious
mean,
people.
this is great for the client, it's great for the business, but it's also an act of self-care
Yes.
for the therapist to
Yes.
run a trauma-informed intake
Yeah.
process.
People think it's crazy that I tell them
Mhm.
I can do my entire BPSS and treatment plan in under 25 minutes.
Uh, that's
Like
great.
in under 25, it can be completely done. Also, my good faith estimates and whatever else is needed to send their way. I
Hmm.
can have it done really quickly because I know exactly what I need to do and I've systematized it all.
I love it. That's so great. Well, we're really excited to have you at the conference. I think it'll be, I mean, again, I've been in this business for a long time. Trauma informed everything has become more and more important. And this is one of those ones until I saw the topic come through, it hadn't even shown up on my radar. And now that I see it, I can't unsee it, right? So,